Yeah, good evening, good morning, and all of that. So I have a very small PowerPoint that I want to share with you. I'm not going to take too much time doing the PowerPoint, right? It's just to give you a sense of the book and tell you maybe one or two stories. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I've not visited, I've been to IFMR, I've been to Madras School of Economics, but I haven't been to Krea. But once this COVID stuff is over, I'm sure I will love to visit, and I'm sure I will. So, normally when economists talk about things, this is the kind of presentation I would be doing. But I am not going to be doing these kinds of things today. I'm going to talk about something more like this. So, you all might know this is a painting by René Magritte, who was a French surrealist. And this painting is called The Son of Man. Probably the apple is the allusion to Adam and Eve, son of God. But anyway, so Magritte's philosophy was that one needs to shock people and at the same time hide things because people are interested in what they cannot see. And this book actually tries to uncover the what you cannot see. So the simple ideas behind things that we do in our everyday life. That's the kind of thing this book wants to delve into. It wants to see if we can take the apple away and see what's behind the apple. Okay, that's the goal here, to see what's behind the apple. So to just get started, I'm going to tell you about one or two things from the book, and then we'll talk about other things. So let's say, we have not seen this. There might be a few of us who have seen these things. These things were called cassette tapes. We grew up with these things, okay? And then, as happened in the movie, technology changes things, right? And because of that, we ended up with compact discs or CDs as they were called. Now, of course, we have even moved away from these CDs. And what I'm trying to tell you here, that technology changes over time. And if you read the book, you will see how change in technology affects us or disrupts us. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what happened once upon a time, Dobara. Now, all of you are familiar with Netflix, but before there was Netflix, there was something called Blockbuster video or similar video chains. Or if you've seen the movie Drishyam, remember what was Ajay Devgan's role in that movie? He ran a video store, okay? And people would go, they would rent out a video, they'd watch it and return it. So I want to talk about a particular curious instance. So imagine you can rent a video for 5 rupees for one day, okay? Then you can go to the store again and rent it for 5 rupees. And you can keep renting it for one day at a time for 5 rupees. But suppose you fail to go to the store tomorrow, for whatever reason you could not watch the movie, you fail to go to the store tomorrow and you don't rent it again. Then the store will charge you a late fee of 10 rupees. This is a very puzzling phenomenon. This was happening in real life. So firms like Blockbuster were making third of their revenues through these types of late fees. Why is this very puzzling? Well, if the firm is willing to rent you the movie for 5 rupees, that's the opportunity cost. Then why is the late fee greater than the opportunity cost? That's the question, right? So you could argue, well, the simple explanation is maybe the firm really wants people to return the video cassette, and that's why they're doing this. Yes, that could be one explanation, but that could be other explanations, because if that was the explanation, then the firm would not be making a third of its revenues through late fees. By the way, Netflix started because the CEO of Netflix hated being late and paying these late fees. So if you go online or if you look at the reading list in the book, you will find the website that tells you the story of Netflix CEO and how he decided to start streaming services because he was fed up paying late fees. Actually, he didn't start with streaming services. They started with mailing you a CD. They'll send you a CD by mail. You send it back. There is no late fee. When you send the CD back, then you get a new CD. So, okay, so let me talk about why the late fee was higher than the opportunity cost. Imagine there are two kinds of people, CEOs and college students. CEOs are very busy, okay? They have a very high value of time. College students have a much lower value of time. So if I reduce the rental price, if I make it 5 rupees, okay, then it will induce everybody to rent more videos. And then unexpected events happen. Let's say that you even know the distribution of these unexpected events, but these unexpected events happen. And when the unexpected event happens, the CEO is not able to go return the video cassette, ends up paying the late fee. When the CEO, so if there are, if under certain distribution of parameters and a certain number of population in the population of CEOs and students, it is worthwhile for the video store to reduce the rental price and set a higher late fee and make more money through the late fee. So for instance, there's also a paper which followed up my paper and looked at credit card competition. And credit card companies apparently do this. To attract customers, they will reduce the APR. That is the annual interest rate you have to pay on the amount of money you owe them. But they will put all kinds of other fees. Okay? So this is something that we see again and again. I just want to show you a table of contents of the books. So what I was talking about is in chapter 2, where have all the mangoes gone? Talks about the third law of demand. Now, everyone may not agree that Alfonso are the best mangoes, and I certainly don't, but that's how everyone views. In God We Trust is about repeated games and why people don't wear a seatbelt, and then every time they drive in front of a temple, they'll do this, but they will not wear a seatbelt. Okay, what drives these types of behavior? The Tale of Two Bounties is about subgame perfection in these times of pandemics, why we should pay our domestic help more, all these kinds of ideas. Okay? So there's also, of course, a chapter about Gandhi. There's something about the first piece of cake. There's something about the last piece of cake. My the very first chapter that I wrote was called P.G. Woodhouse's Futurist. That is chapter 24. You can start with that. You can read the chapters in any order. Of course, there's an introduction, a coda, and a suggested reading list, which allows you to go into greater detail into the book. The other thing I want to talk about now is the first piece of cake. So this chapter started with a story. My daughter, who is now 11 years old, this is last year, she had a friend visiting, and every time comes over to her house to play, her best friend. And so when these two girls play in the middle of their playtime, usually we give them something to eat. So that day I went and gave her. I took 2 pieces of chocolate, those Lindt chocolates. I went and took it to them. And then my daughter, instead of waiting for her friend to take the chocolate first, picked up a piece of chocolate first. And I was very unhappy with her. Of course, I didn't say anything then. After her friend left, I said, why do you do that? We have to give the guest the first chance. Why do you do these things? Okay. And her response was, well, I know what my friend wanted. I know that she wanted the other piece of chocolate. So does it matter that I took it first? Because she got what she wanted, I got what I wanted. And that got me started about why is it that we care about hospitality. Okay, if you look globally across the world, okay, Japanese, very high culture of hospitality, legendary. Okay, Middle East, okay? The Filipinos, okay? Armenia. So in India we say Atithi Devo Bhava. In Armenia they say the guest is God's messenger. Okay. The question I want to ask is, why is this? Well, there can be a number of reasons. Let me first offer you some selfish reasons. Okay. So, of course, we don't need to do this when the other person is somebody you know very well. So you don't have to do this with your brother and sister or your cousins. But when it's a guest, we think we should offer it to them first. Why? Because if you offer it, if it's the person who you don't know very well, you offer something to them, what happens? They feel grateful. They feel special. It's like going on a date. You're trying to impress your date. So you are trying to be on your best behavior. What does that require? Being on your best behavior requires that you make the offering to the first person. Another way you can think about this, I'm giving you purely selfish reasons, not religion or cultural. Okay. Another way why you want to do this is this idea that Jim Andrioni says called warm glow. When you do something nice for somebody else, you feel good. Okay? And that may be a reason why you want to offer something to another person. Another reason you might want to do that is in an age where food was not very plentiful, when you are able to offer the first amount of food to somebody else, what are you telling this person? Look, I'm a good ally. I can do without food, or I have so much food that I can afford giving you the first choice. Okay. So you are actually trying to tell the person who doesn't know you very well, or the person you're trying to impress, that I can do a lot of things for you. I'm a very, very good ally. These are all selfish reasons. Then we can ask, so once we have all these reasons, why do we say Atithi Devo Bhava? Why do we have it in religion? The reason we want to do it we want to put it in religion is because, remember, there's always the temptation. The temptation to grab the first piece of food. Why? Because from an evolutionary point of view, we don't want to go hungry. Evolution suggests we should grab the first piece of food. By coding it in religion, what are we doing? We are leaving, or we are eliminating the option for us to actually fall into temptation. That's the reason why we have an alarm clock, because we're afraid we won't be able to get up. So we have an alarm clock that will help us get up. Okay? We put this into religion so that we can get up. You may want to think, how did the buffet system start? One idea could be, what if you have more than one guest? What do you do? Well, of course, the buffet system is convenient, but one can also imagine that the reason the buffet system started is when you have multiple guests, you don't know who you want to give priority to. You say, okay, here is the food, you guys eat. That's one option. Right? You could also think, why is this cultural? It's cultural because particularly if you look along the Silk Road, where trade was very important, hospitality is very strong. Hospitality is a very strong part of the culture of the Silk Road. Why? Because in order to facilitate trade, remember, those days travel was very difficult. So if you were not hospitable, there would be no trade. People would not have an incentive to make these long, difficult journeys to bring you goods, to bring you ideas. And of course, they also brought you negative things like disease, right? I mean, if there was no trade, if there was no globalization, we would not be living in an age of COVID. COVID would be contained in one place, okay? So these are all reasons why we do this. So I will urge you to read this chapter on the first piece of cake. I mean, it also explains why people might want to eat together from a common plate, okay? Like in Middle Eastern cultures, this is very much part of the reason. This is very much part of the culture. People eat from a common plate. Why? So read the book. You will find out a little more about these things. I don't want to take more time talking about stories. I have a competition going on. If you have the 3 best questions sent to this email here in the month of December, we'll get a prize. So this is the email. It's very easy to remember, econsmallthings@gmail.com. The Twitter handle is Sudipta here. I'm going to show you the website in a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I'm going to share the website screen in a minute. Okay. And then I think we can move on to other things. Let's see. Okay. So can you see the screen? Okay. So this is a little bit, you can open this and it'll show you how the book looks. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So you can go, you can read parts of the book. There are a few, I mean, the introduction and the first chapter are available here. There's a little bit about me. There's a long list of acknowledgements. Hindu Business Line plays a big role in this. My friend Harish Damodaran, who works at the Indian Express, Professor Kaushik Basu, and a lot of teachers along the way have taught me many things. So I'm just going to stop here and go back to other. So you already saw this. So let me show you some other elements of the book. So there is, there are 6 takeaways from the book. So one is incentives matter. The other one is heterogeneity matters. Complementarities matter, and so on. Then there's a little bit about me. You can see I grew up in the steel city of Rourkela. I studied in Delhi. Then I went and did my PhD in the US. So it tells you a little bit about me. There are book reviews. There is something about efficiency wages. And the second interview you will see is an interview. It's not showing up, but if you click on it, it will show up. That's my daughter interviewing me about the book. It's quite a fun interview. And you also find some of my other writings. And then I do want to show you that there is a Q&A section where you can ask questions. Right, where is the question? Yeah, so you can ask questions right now. So I have to approve the question. There are a couple of questions that have been sent. I have not approved them, but once I approve the question, they'll show up here. Okay. So this is the book's website. Go spend some time, check it out. You will have fun. And Shreya, should I do the reading now or should we have a conversation I can read towards the end?
Perhaps let's start the conversation, and let's start it
Yeah.
with the chapter that you just explained, which was about, the first piece of cake. I'm really interested in knowing, what Professor Ramaswamy has to say about it. Like, does he agree with you? Does he have a different take on it? Like, I mean, please, do let us know.
All right, great. Thank you, Shreya. The simple answer is I agree. Let me rephrase provide some context. And it's a great pleasure, Sudipta, to have you be here and also launch this book, and also have my colleague Madhuri at this conversation. I just wanted to frame my overall comment and impression when I received the book. One of my most favorite courses that I've enjoyed teaching is microeconomics, both at the introductory level and at the intermediate level. And, I would say that your book sort of belongs in a genre of books like along the likes of Robert Frank and Tyler Cowen and Stephen Landsberg and even Kaushik Basu, who is both your mentor and one of the reasons I became a development economist. And what what I really enjoyed when I read your various chapters is where it's different from these other books, right? So what these books for some of the audience members is they do an incredible job of it's like what I tell my students: putting on glasses. The world doesn't change, but you see the glasses with putting on spectacles, and you suddenly see things in a very sharp way. And so that's the beauty of what economists love to do, is to provide answers to everyday small things, mundane things, and some very deep things, right? So what is in every chapter, what I liked is the fact that there is a lot of insight and there's a lot of observation that is written in a very airy, witty, humorous, but sort of very deep way. And I think in particular, what was overall comment about the book is that it has so many examples from our own Indian context. And it sort of brought back memories of growing up in Delhi, because all these other books are quite westernized, as they should be. And so it's great to see an author who brings back so many examples. And of course, you don't just limit yourself to the Indian examples, but you have a global set of examples. But it's great to see. I can't think of another book that does this as effectively in terms of laying out. And I started out, I think, reading every chapter, and then I gave up and then just picked randomly, and it didn't seem to affect the flow. But so my simple answer is I do agree with you on the first piece of cake, but I wanted to sort of lay it out by saying the book is really commendable and worth reading for anybody interested in economics in general, but also microeconomics in particular. And I'm curious, how did you get interested in sort of, you told us about what made you want to write this book, but as you and I know, the profession is so driven by what you presented the very first page of your PowerPoint. What made you want to use English, but what is really coming out of your mouth or what's coming out of your pages is economics, right? But with very little graphs, with very little jargon, but it's really dripping with economic insights, right? So what made you, with the training that you received, to actually do something like this, which is a great service to the profession? Let me start with that question first.
Thank you, Sundar. So, the answer is a little bit nuanced. So, first, I think you can see that this is a labor of love. And second, I think you can also see that I love teaching. So, when I teach in the class, I always like to use stark examples, or examples that when the students go away, they will remember. They may not remember the content, but they will certainly remember the example, and that helps them get through. So I've always had, this desire to find examples that will stick in people's head. And I had, to be honest, you're right, I had never intended to do popular writing or anything of that sort. And my friend Harish Damodaran, at some point, he was the opinions editor for Business Line. So when he became opinions editor, and we go back long ways, we were friends in the hostel. So he said, "Why don't you write something?" And that's it. That's when I wrote the first chapter, that PG Woodhouse chapter, that was written around that time when foreign FDI in India was a big issue. And then I was reading P.G. Woodhouse. I put the two together. It seemed to gel. Then after that, I wrote a few pieces. And then again, I went back to doing that first slide kind of thing. So there was a gap. And then Kaushik Basu sort of encouraged me, and then I finished the book.
Wonderful. I mean, it's a great
So,
lesson
yeah,
for
it
all
was kind of,
students who are thinking about doing economics, that there's a lot of joy in the way you write, and there's a lot of lessons one can learn about how to be a serious economist and still not get caught up in jargon. So,
yeah, I will add one thing. Writing is not easy because my first PhD chapter that was published, my, my advisor is German and he is really meticulous about writing. 54 drafts.
yes,
So
absolutely.
this is also something to keep in mind. 54 drafts.
Madhuri?
Yeah, thank you, Sundar, for the nice summary you provided. And of course, I want to thank Pranjan and Shreya for giving us this wonderful opportunity to interact with the author. I mean, it's an absolute delight to go through the book. And every chapter actually brought a smile on my face, because it's not just about economics you're talking about, the way you have interwoven everything. I mean, the cultural context, the behavioral issues, the social context, and the Indian context, that's the most important. So, bits and pieces of Bollywood here and there, and of course, Doordarshan, bringing back those memories of Ek Chidiya, Anek Chidiya, it's so lovely to how those things, everything is brought into this, and it's so much well targeted for something for especially for the Indian students. I mean, they would really appreciate to read all this. And I thought finally a book which demystifies game theory, because as you mentioned, either I get a response when you say game theory, either people say game theory, is it about video games, or I get a response something like, oh, it's all math. I mean, it's very highly complex, isn't it? Tell us about algorithms and how complex algorithms that Google works with, all that. So there's no middle ground, and no one has an idea about what game theory is. It's such a beautiful subject that tries to link all these social behavior. So I had a list of questions actually. Every chapter I was reading, and I was like, okay, lovely. So I kept some questions kept popping up. So, but before I get into those questions, I thought, let me ask you one first. The first one is, you mentioned in your book that you grew up in Rourkela, the Ispat school. And I know that, I'm familiar with their environment. I know that, you're surrounded by engineers all around you. And there is this immense pressure to either get into engineering or to just do medicine. Nothing else in those days, actually. So I want to ask you, what made you choose this profession?
So Madhuri, you're absolutely right. I grew up in Rourkela, Ispat English medium school, Ispat bhi hum banate hain, say logo, all of that. On top of that, my father used to teach at REC Rourkela, now NIT Rourkela. So I lived in a college campus full of engineers. The town, of course, was full of engineers. So I can tell you that 11th, 12th, I did science. And every day in class 11 and 12, there used to be a fight in my house. So of course, I did Sears Szymanski, I did Resnick Halliday. I know Piskunov, Maron. I have done all those books, but I have always been fascinated by human behavior, and I had economics in school, so I wanted to do something to do with human behavior. I wasn't sure which discipline, but economics seemed the most reasonable. I had no exposure to political science, I had no exposure to sociology, so it's really between history, economics, and English. And I thought economics is the most interesting. Of course, once I started doing economics, then I realized, I loved the subject from day one, especially microeconomic theory. I'd done a fair bit of math, so I was not worried about that. So I really enjoyed it. And then I think, being in Delhi University, you get exposure to some of these other great scholars from not just from Delhi School of Economics, also from all over the world. People come give lectures, you go to a few of those. That's it. You are hooked on the subject. You really want to do that. And that's how I ended up. But yes, I have to agree that class 11 and 12 at my house, even my parents will tell you, it was not a pleasant time.
Yeah, I can visualize that actually. Yeah, but that's a great, I mean, yeah. So it was a great choice, I must say, for every one of us that you made, because otherwise you wouldn't have seen this book today. Yeah, so coming to, I was reading this information asymmetry, and you spoke about, how the Grameen Bank, the evolution of Grameen Bank, and how this solves the information asymmetry problem. So, on a more serious note, and coming to the current context, so I thought, can we link this to the current farm protests? I mean, do you think that in any ways, some ways that this the agents, farmers, or or farmers who develop as agents who have control over this input and financial markets, how they are able to solve this information asymmetry. Now, if you break that link, they are probably on a rough turf now. They're losing their turf. So could that be one of the also the distrust or the insecurity that is behind this be this farmer protests?
So,
What is your take
so,
on this?
so I have not read a lot of detail about the farm bill, but I've done some reading. And Harish, of course, writes on this because he's the agricultural expert for Indian Express. So I've been reading his pieces, and from what I understand, there are three pieces of legislation. The third one is really the problematic one. So yes, if we move to a new arrangement, every time there is new technology, there is disruption, there is uncertainty, and the human brain fundamentally does not like uncertainty. So yes, it is true that having sort of a well-known minimum support price, having a mandi where you go and trade, this is like a focal point. This is another issue in game theory where focal point is a coordination point, which everyone knows we can all go to. We understand that, goes back to Schelling. It's a very nice thing to have. But if you remove that, we don't know what structures will emerge. We don't, those structures, some of those structures might be exploitative, some of those structures might not be exploitative. So in some sense, by not giving more guidance, so I think this is partly what the issue is. By saying we will get rid of this, but without providing additional guidelines, then there is uncertainty that's being created, and that's what's leading to some of these protests. So if we had more information, there would probably be less problems. But I do want to say another thing that is like a prisoner's dilemma, and that's about the subsidies. Okay, so people talk a lot about subsidies and that farmers are getting subsidies, and that is true. And that affects our competitiveness globally, the minimum support price, all of these things. I want to argue that that's a little bit like a prisoner's dilemma, because when you look at subsidies to farmers, you cannot look at subsidies to Indian farmers in isolation. Okay, there are subsidies that are being given to farmers in different countries all over the world. In fact, in some of the developed countries, the size of the subsidy might be equal to the GDP of an African country. Okay? Mm-hmm. So you have to realize that if other countries are doing this and you don't do this, you are harming your farmers anyway. So global competitiveness is a little bit dependent not just on what subsidies you are giving, but also what subsidies others are giving. And this is again a bit of a problem, like a prisoner's dilemma, because if other countries are not giving subsidies, you want to give your farmers subsidies because that enables them to be competitive. If you are giving your farmers subsidies, all the other countries also want to give their farmers subsidies because they want their farmers to be subsidies. In the end, the effect of the subsidies is basically washed out. But this is an equilibrium from which nobody can deviate, just like advertising, right? If your rival is not advertising, you want to advertise because you will get market share. And if you are advertising, if the rival is advertising, you also still want to advertise because you want to keep up. So either way you will advertise. The advertising really does not help anybody unless it's informational advertising, which is creating awareness about a product. And there you go. So I think that the prisoner's dilemma element is there in the subsidies.
Right.
Sudipta, if I could just pick up from Madhuri's question, and you talked about your first article being the P.G. Wodehouse, and just before we started this conversation, we were talking about P.G. Wodehouse remains one of my absolute favorite authors, and it's a really well-written piece. And then you talked to us about the first piece of Cake. And I enjoyed reading your articles on complementarity, and then of course how to leave chappals in front of temples so that they don't get stolen. And each of them has interesting, humorous insights and and deep insights. Do you have a favorite chapter, or are you like a parent that says all my kids are equally, I love all of them? You have so many incidents. I have this question, and then I have a more fundamental question, but I want you to just tell me, is there a favorite case, and why is that the case?
So actually, I can't pick one, but I'll pick two or three that I really have enjoyed writing. So Piyura's chapter, because the very first thing I wrote. I like the chapter on Gandhi because, today, I mean, revisionist history has dumped all kinds of things on Gandhi. But at the end of the day, if you look at the guy, he had the guts to do what very few people are willing to do. He gave the world a vehicle that is very hard. Second, the chapter talks about the fact that he traveled throughout India in third class. I want to see how many politicians today, anywhere in the world, will travel third class by train or even economy class on the plane. That's okay. Most of the times it is a 2-hour flight, so maybe you can do that. How many politicians are willing to do that? So that's another chapter I like. The complementarity chapter, I had fun writing that one. And then the one with the Pied Piper of Hamelin.
Okay.
Those are the fun chapters. I mean, there are serious chapters, right? But those are the fun chapters.
So if you could just ask a more fundamental question, right? So one of the questions that often gets asked, especially because so many of the books that we get in India are written by Western authors and for Western audiences, other than, as I said, our common mentor, Kaushik Basu's books, for instance, there are other Indian authors too. But oftentimes, what is interesting about the examples that you cite in your book is that you have literally examples from the US, from Europe, in fact, the left shoe, right shoe in Sweden and Denmark example, or when you did your experiment with undergraduate students from Virginia Tech, right? And then, of course, you have lots of Indian examples, right? So it sort of lends more credence to this universalism of economics, which gives it this sense of science. And this fundamental debate about, is economics a science or is economic an art? And do Indian consumers behave differently than Japanese consumers or Ghanaian or Kenyan consumers because of history, politics, and sociology and culture? What would you say from having written this book, living in multiple cultures, to those students and to defend the discipline that says there is a universalism of behavioral economics that, one can see through in not just your book, but in the profession itself?
So it's very, very good question. It's a very deep, insightful question. So first, let's say something. Let's put the caveat. I want to start with saying, because I'm a theorist, I want to think about saying, let's hold everything else constant. When we build models, we make that assumption, or we use Occam's razor, which is let's keep everything simple. So what I will argue is that, yes, culture matters. Yes, people are not necessarily always selfish. I mean, they may be altruistic, and behavioral economics is already capturing that. But I think what economics says is that if we are selfish and if we are utility maximizing, this is how we will behave. This is regardless of culture. This is regardless of history. Those are things that will affect things on the margin, or they will color the behavior that you will finally get. But the basic underlying motives are economic. And one way to think about this is you can go back to Milton Friedman and people behave as if, or a very simple way to say is that, economists say firms are maximizing profits. No, firms don't always do. Well, you know what? If a firm does not maximize profits, in the long run, it will not be on the stock market anymore. Okay? So yes, for temporarily, they might do other things. But at the end of the day, they are maximizing profits. And it doesn't matter whether it's a firm from Japan, it's a firm from India, it's a firm from Ghana, or Belgium. It's all the same. So I think there is a universalism, but we are human beings. We are not molecules as in chemistry. So of course, moods affect us, relatives affect us, culture affects us. So all of this matters.
Right.
But the basic model remains universal.
Madhuri?
Yeah. So picking up from the Pied Piper chapter, you spoke about that the secret, the strategy that the Pied Piper had about, he took all the kids along with him. That was really fascinated me, that how you drew the parallels with that and the Dr. Strangelove thing, the doomsday scenario. So, I mean, can you speak a little bit more about that? Because again, that brings us to the other one also, the chicken game, the standoff happening between India and China as well. That both of them threatening each other. But, what if one of them has some secret strategy in place? Is it possible? And is there any advantage having that secret strategy at all?
Yeah. So the point that I was trying to make in that chapter is that if you have a secret strategy, then it's not useful if you hide your secret strategy. So if the Pied Piper really wanted to get paid, he should have informed the town of Hamlin that he can steal their children. Because, I mean, this is also what comes up in Dr. Strangelove, that if you have a weapon that can blow up the entire world, and if you keep it a secret, there is no point, because then you will just have to blow up the entire world for anybody to believe you. Of course, what is true, you could also ask is, well, if the Pied Piper had told the town of Hamlin that, you know what, I can steal all your children, would they have believed him? Credibility is an issue, but if you have a credible weapon, there is no point keeping it a secret, right? So that's the chapter I wanted to. Now, going to the game of chicken, I think this is indeed a problem. As the world becomes more and more polarized, I think politicians everywhere are playing the game of chicken, whether it is negotiating on climate change, whether it is negotiating on border, whether it's India, China, India, Pakistan, Trump shipping, all of these people. Because in the game of chicken, reputation is more important than your own life. So you're willing to sacrifice the life of people just to keep the politician's reputation alive. And so as we go into a more polarized world, that happens. And it's a secret, whether China has, I hope they don't have a secret strategy, but as I said, I think if they had a secret strategy, they would reveal it. So, that would be my take on that.
So you also gave us the
original Pied Piper, in my opinion, is Krishna.
It's a Krishna.
Because when nobody can hide. Everybody comes running to him. So so in that sense, yes, I wanted to write a truly Indian book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you also gave the, for the game theory students or the people, who have done game theory, the Payoff Matrix also you have shown us that. So I just thought that, what if the stakes really increase in this game of chicken, the probability of survival, will it increase or decrease? That depends on the stakes, right? Also the stakes. If the stakes are really high, the payoffs will change, right?
Yeah. Yes. So the stakes are really high. Which Nash equilibrium we will get to, that depends on common knowledge and who does how much thinking. Of course, there's attitudes, right? So for example, we say before playing, getting into the car in that movie with Rebel Without a Cause, if one of the drivers took out the steering wheel, then you know that this person, that's it. They're in this game to win, no matter what happens. Or if they drank a whole bottle of vodka before getting into the car, then you know that this person has Dutch courage and you don't know what they're going to do. So the point I was trying to make there is that attitude, just like Kangana Ranaut, attitude matters in these kinds of games, right? So it's a signal. Your attitude signals what you're willing to do. So in the game of chicken, attitude is really important. Even if the payoffs become higher, they're becoming higher for both. So,
should we take any questions from the audience? I thought I saw Madhuri, somebody had raised their hand.
Raised a hand, yes. I think somebody called Visesh, somebody had joined, but I don't know. Now there's nobody here.
If anybody has a question, they can use the Q&A option and it'll pop up on all our screens.
Okay.
Just letting all the participants know.
So another question, Sudipta, that has always fascinated me is, you grew up in pre-liberalization India, and then you sort of became a professional economist when the Indian economy became more interesting in some sense to study. Do you find the insights from behavioral economics in terms of how consumer behaviors have changed beyond the obvious ones that we are become more consumerist in terms of, and I would like you to sort of tell the audience, because I think you traced that in a number of your chapters, like the Telegram chapter and so on. But do you see how that has changed in terms of the arc of the last 25 or 30 years when with the reforms in place. Now there's an entire generation that has grown up away from the license permit Raj that you and I might have, so how do you trace that? And what has been the fascinating, find of the Indian consumer?
So I think, you're absolutely right that, things have changed in India. The Indian consumer has evolved. Actually, India as a market has evolved.
Right.
And people are willing to, so there's so much entrepreneurial activity. In fact, I will say this, and I say this to my friends in the West, that every time when I go to Delhi, because, usually the first stop, and I go to India very often. So at least this year, since March, I've not been able to travel, but usually I'd go to India
Right.
every year, 2-3 times.
Yeah.
Once you arrive in Delhi, you can feel the energy of economic activity. India's young population, there's a lot of entrepreneurship, there's a lot of dynamism, and I think getting rid of the license Raj and the permit Raj has opened up the economy in a way that has benefited, of course, at the same time from the growth in technology. So we have a large English-speaking population. We have enough people with technical background. All of this has created growth in certain ways that has created large amounts of economic activity, has put enough money into the hands of a certain class of consumers. And this has led to all kinds of interesting ideas, including, I don't see too much of the impact of behavioral economics in Indian marketing yet, except for by the big firms. They are obviously always trying the same thing. But Indian consumers are responding to these kinds of things. But in my opinion, I think sort of the behavioral economics of Indian consumers. So there are two areas that I would, if I was coming back to India, I would get into right now. One is behavioral economics and marketing, that side. And the other one, I think that nobody is doing right now is sort of the big data economics.
Big data.
I think there is no serious research. People are teaching, but there is no serious research on this. And also the stuff that is being taught to people is really on the stats computer science side, which is mostly data mining. So just so the students understand, remember when people like statisticians and computer scientists talk about big data, they're not looking for they're looking for patterns in the behavior. They're never looking at what drives the behavior. So the minute you go from one data set to another data set, it's not clear that this pattern will hold. So that kind of thing is not being done. So these are two big spaces to get into in India right now.
How about information? Since you talk about that also with information asymmetries, you think that's fairly well developed or well developing?
No, I think, the problem with information, I think in India is that sort of consent issues are big because we don't have enough regulation. So there's a lot of gray areas. So do we have structures in place where I can get informed consent from consumers, take their information, harvest that? So I think unless we sort of put some systems in place, that research will be problematic always, because people are not, in my opinion, people are not quite sure whether I should do this. Companies are not quite sure whether I can do it. I mean, of course, they share the data sometimes without even thinking.
Right.
But then, unless you can, so research will not take place unless we have these structures in place and people can share the data of the research. So that's, I think, we need a little more structure there. And so that big data and information, both of those would combine together to make more progress.
Thank you.
I mean, we develop lots of apps. We're doing good there.
Yeah, that's very perceptive. Madhuri?
Yeah, so since we're speaking about, university and education and careers, I also, thought, what about the chapter you wrote on discrimination? You spoke about the role of the two types of discrimination that happen, the statistical and the taste-based. And you said that, universities can have a big role to play in actually mitigating the statistical discrimination. So, can you please throw some more light on that? Because I thought, what about the taste-based discrimination, which is still a big hurdle? How do can game theory have some solutions, or to get around this? Some kind of rule-based social norms or something which can be imposed, which make people switch to a different kind of behavior.
So it's very good questions, very difficult problem. So statistical discrimination, at least we understand what. So I will not go into details, but I'll explain very simply what is statistical discrimination. When we are faced with lots of information, what do? We try to create a stereotype in our head, okay, of a certain type of person. So for example, if you look at US, what happens is people might say, well, black people are more black people are in prison. So when I see a black person, I tend in my brain, instead of processing each individual, right, I tend to create a stereotype where I say, okay, maybe the black person is responsible for crimes. We have all these stereotypes about Sardars, and we make all these jokes about Sardars in India. We have a stereotype about Gurkhas, and we're going to be great fighters. Not every Gurkha has to be a great fighter. So stereotypes are one way of the brain processing complex information. Again, something behavioral economics has taught us, that that's what we do. Taste-based discrimination, purely like, I don't like broccoli, right? So that's taste. I like gobi, but I don't like broccoli. That's purely taste, and that's completely unpardonable. I mean, stereotypes, we can say that data creates stereotypes. It's a heuristic, and we can try to train ourselves against it and unlearn that heuristic. Maybe if we set up a set of pointers for a person to analyze the data with, they will go through it and prevent the stereotype. But taste-based discrimination, the only way to fight, because that's ignorance. This is like white supremacists, neo-Nazis. The only way to do that is education. That's why I think universities play a big role. So
I think we're coming to an hour's mark. So Sudipta, could you just, should we wrap the session up? Because we're reaching 7:30 p.m. And I really want for you to do a little bit of reading from the book as well, so that we can then end the session on, a strong pitch for the book.
All right.
Great.
I will do that. I will read.
Oh, wait. We have a question here, actually.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Which I think, all three of you could perhaps answer. It's an anonymous attendee who's asking, great book and very interesting anecdotes. I feel it could really expose students to the practical. Oh, actually, it's just a really nice comment from someone. Yes. It's not really a question. They're saying that, yeah. So I think we can go ahead with the reading.
Right. So I will start. I will just read a little bit from the introduction. Okay, and I will start with Chennai. By the way, all the people in the introduction are real people. So Mr. Sen, 9:16 a.m. Chennai. Mr. Sen. Let me give you who's Mr. Sen. Mr. Sen is Mr. Orgha Sen, RBS Chennai. Okay, so he's actually an old friend of mine. He works in RBS Chennai. He's fairly high up in RBS. I don't remember his exact designation, but yes, that's him, Mr. Orgha Sen. Mr. Sen was rushing down the stairs. He was already late for work, and once again regretting the decision to binge watch his favorite show on a Thursday night. His driver was waiting for him in the car. They would most definitely hit peak hour traffic. Soon they were passing the famous Chennai temple, and once again his driver, who never wore his seatbelt while driving, said a quick prayer for safety. This daily ritual never failed to annoy Mr. Sen. He was a confirmed atheist and could not endorse such behavior. Unfortunately, before he launched into a tirade, the phone rang. It was his wife. She had called to remind him to make an urgent bill payment if he wanted to avoid a late fee. He had a packed schedule today and realized that he would either have to make the payment immediately or accept the late fee. By the time he finished deliberating over this decision, they had already crossed the temple, and Mr. Sen discovered that once again he had lost the opportunity to lecture his driver on the seatbelt issue. 10:24 a.m. Rourkela. Mr. DeCosta, and he was our favorite teacher. Anybody who went to my school, he's passed away now, but he was our favorite teacher. So this was an eulogy to him. Mr. DeCosta was walking into his class and looking forward to it, especially today, since he would start to study photosynthesis and the carbon cycle. In general, he was a good teacher, and he looked forward to his class every day. Once, one of his students had offered him an interesting argument. Since Mr. DeCosta explained things so well in class and made difficult concepts seem extremely easy, is not work as hard as they did in their other classes. So this is something I want to point out, that sometimes if you make it too easy for the students, if you're too good a teacher, maybe the incentives go the other way around. In fact, the student had gone on to partially blame Mr. DaCosta for his poor performance. An excellent example of moral hazard. But what could he do? Become a bad teacher? So then I will skip the next one in Gurgaon and I'll go to lunch. Lunch. Jhaji watched that last piece of pizza steadfastly. It was always the same story. Whenever they ordered pizza at work, everyone would pass up the last slice, saying that they were completely full. Yet, he knew very well that some of them, like Manas and Tarun, for example, he had seen them eating at buffets and he knew their ravenous appetites only too well, were simply pretending not to be hungry. Although he was also a willing participant, he never quite understood the silly farce. In the end, with a twinkle in her eye, Mrs. Khanna would always brazenly grab the last slice of pie. But today she was on leave, and he wondered what fate had in store for that last piece. Many more such quotidian stories could be told about people going through their daily businesses, and quite likely, some of these narratives will even resonate with different readers. I could even find little episodes from one day in the life of Ivan Denisovich in his prison camp. In fact, these events could be set in many places at different times and be about people from various walks of life. There is one common thread running through them all. Though you can find serious economic behaviors in these little snippets of life. And in fact, you can read the chapters in any order you like, which basically Sundar just said he did, except maybe for the cake chapters. This is a book about the economics of these small things. Over the course of the book, I will delve into economic concepts behind the events mentioned here and other such phenomena drawn from everyday life. The book invites you to explore these different economic ideas and concepts and to have fun while doing it. And for those interested in exploring these topics further, there is a detailed reading list at the end. Happy reading. So that's a little bit from the introduction.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Sudipta. That was amazing. And I think everybody who's a part of the audience would have got a fairly good idea of what the book is about. And I'm sure it'll have enough people intrigued to go and order themselves a copy of the book, either from Amazon or their nearest bookstore. I also wanted to just thank Professor Ramaswamy and Professor Madhuri for hosting such a beautifully interesting session. I think you really, I think we've done 3 sessions for the book, and out of all 3, I think this one went the deepest inside the subject matter. And I'm so happy about that. And I can see Dr. Sarangi enthusiastically agreeing with me, because I really think that the conversation here taught me a lot more than I already knew after reading the book. So thank you so much. And for everybody who's attended, thank you for being so patient and sticking with us throughout the 1 hour that you've been here. Really appreciate it.
I also want to say thank you. And Shreya is right. I mean, this is the one where we actually delved more into fundamental questions. I mean, you know, we did it at IIT Bombay, we did it at Ahmedabad, but this session, I think, was the one that went really into more fundamentals. It was a cozier session. It was a little bit small, you know, this was a very small interested group. I loved the session. I loved the interaction. And I'm going to urge the students, feel free to send me questions. As I said, there will be a prize for the top 3 questions. And thank you, Sundar. Thank you, Madhuri.
Thank you, Sudipta.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
You know, it's all I have to say, as I said in the beginning, this is a wonderful addition to people interested in economic analysis and micro, and especially students in studying in economics in India. Even though the title is Economics of Small Things, it carries a very big punch. And I wish you all the best and wonderful sales, but it's a really, I couldn't keep it down. And that itself is a testimony to how well it's been crafted.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Professor Sudipta, for joining us. It was a great session, and thank you, Shreya, for organizing this. We would love to, you know, keep in touch and read more books. I mean, I wish that we have more such books, which demystifies these concepts and, you know, it brings about interest in the topics and the subject. Otherwise, it's just, you know, in the very esoteric so far. So thank you again, once again. And I thought there was a question somewhere, but I don't know if you have the time, but that's okay.
I actually answered them all. Our audience is extremely sweet. They just sent 3 wonderful messages. Okay. And one person had queried whether they could ask questions directly to Dr. Sarangi, to which I've already answered.
Great.
So
thank you. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Shreya.
Good night.